Hello and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I'm Taylor Rockwell. No Daryl Grove yet. We're going to be recording an episode later on today. He will be there. We will both be there in studio. But for now, I've called up Luke Moore of the Football Ramble and more recently of On the Continent, a new podcast. We talk a lot about that. We talk a lot about the Football Ramble and podcasting in general. Luke, I think this is like his 6th appearance on the show. He's an old friend and a good friend, and he's got lots of interesting stuff to say. So here's my conversation with Luke Moore, and then check back later on today for my longer conversation, perhaps, with Daryl Grove. We're going to be talking the Champions League draw, maybe a couple listener questions, obviously some scouting, and some follow-up to the USMNT draft. People share their opinions with us. We have lots to discuss, I think. So until then, here is my conversation with Luke Moore. Joining me now, I've got my friend and yours of the Football Ramble, Luke Moore, more recently of On the Continent, the new podcast, Luke Moore. Luke, thanks so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Taylor.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's good to speak to you again. It's been entirely too long, so I'm happy to have you on, and I'm very happy to hear about On the Continent, which I've listened to and really enjoyed.
Yeah, it's like a European-focused show. So those of people who are listening who will be familiar with the Football Ramble will know that we generally just talk about UK football, unless something mad's happening, like Mike Petka of Real Salt Lake, as you probably heard earlier this week. But this one, On the Continent, is with Marcus and myself, and also Andy Brassel and James Horncastle, and we focus on football from mainland Europe, all the big stories. It's like a weekly sort of news digest, I guess, and it comes out every Wednesday.
And what went into creating this show? Like, why didn't you guys just decide to do more of the Football Ramble? How did you get James and Andy on board?
Well, I've known James and Andy for a while. I mean, hopefully your listeners will be familiar with their work. They're both the best at what they do, in my opinion. So it was a bit of a resource issue. We couldn't really, all four of us, do more than 2 shows a week currently. And it's also important just to freshen it up. And it was going to be a very different feel to the Ramble. So we wanted to make sure that there was a bit of clear blue water so people understood that it was a Football Ramble produced show.
I gotcha.
But it's not the Ramble, it's something completely different. And I think it made sense to give us a fresh new perspective. And like I say, James and Andy are the best around, in my opinion, so I was delighted to be working with them.
Yeah, and as I said, I listened to it, I really enjoyed it. And I think one of the things I enjoyed the most is sometimes especially with new podcasts, and especially with new soccer podcasts, that energy can be a little bit low, and it can be very subdued starting because no one really wants to jump in, no one's entirely sure who needs to jump in when. I felt like you guys had really good energy from the jump, and it was very good back and forth, good banter. It was very enjoyable and informative, so nicely done.
I appreciate that. And yeah, listen, I'm a born talker, so I need to be told to shut up, not to jump in. The other guys are great at judging it, though, and keeping me quiet. The other thing that's worth mentioning is, by the way, that we had a little bit of chat from listeners who wanted to hear us talk about European football. And, of course, we only get an hour twice a week, so we didn't want to sort of lip service 5 minutes of European football because it's far too big a subject for that. So we just thought, hey, let's just do a completely new show.
So, and with that in mind, is it going to be more like kind of the major leagues in European football, or is it going to be more like whatever the biggest news is that given week?
I think you have to look at both. I think you need to be conscious of going where the stories are. You've got to have a bit of a nose for the news and be able to sniff it out. And James and Andy will be able to help with that. But at the same time, you can't do the same thing every week. I mean, I don't want to do, now that Barcelona have announced they're suing Neymar, I don't want to do another 3 weeks of Neymar at the top of the show every week. So we have to be a bit creative with it and maybe bring some new bits and pieces to people's attention to keep it interesting and fresh. But yeah, we'll see as we go. I don't like to plan stuff too much on this sort of thing. I like to just see where it takes us, really. And as long as we're not going too esoteric, I think it'll be fine.
Well, lovely. So since you don't want to talk about Barcelona, we're going to talk about Barcelona right away. But first, I wanted to ask you, a long, long time ago, you mentioned, I think it was watching soccer or football, whichever you want to go with James and Andy. I think it was James and Andy, and that one of them didn't speak Italian, but the other one slowly figured it out from speaking Spanish, and they're both very knowledgeable of the game and knowledgeable of how to pick up on culture and language, and that seems like a good asset to have in a European football show, I have to say.
Do you know what? Between them, I think, between the four of us, shall I say, I think we've got about 8 languages. I'll let you be the judge of how many I'm contributing to that. But Andy and James particularly, I think Andy, he'll kill me if he hears this. He's a very modest man. I think he's got French, Portuguese, Spanish, and maybe German. I think James has got Italian, French, a bit of German. I think one of them might have Turkish as well, bizarrely. So they've got a lot of language between, which is great because it means they're not just going to be consuming the English media. They can go straight to source and find out the real story. And the reason that's important, by the way, is because recently we saw a pair of German authors write a book about the business of football, and it was serialized in Bild, which is a German newspaper for those who aren't aware. And a lot of the British press picked up on it and relied, it seemed to me, on fairly dodgy translations and different bits and pieces like that. And it dominated the news cycle in football over here for a couple of days at least. But I think the great asset of On the Continent will be that James or Andy or both will be able to go straight to the source and find out exactly what's happening, and that'll give us a little bit more clarity because the newspapers here like to be a little bit more dramatic. So, look, if you're not aware of James Horncastle and Andy Brassell's work, do check it out on The Continent because it's very, very interesting, especially for those of you who love European football but think that there's a few too many games around, understandably, and you can't stay across it. This aims to be a weekly digest of all the big stories.
Very nice. I like the work I've seen from James, but I've had a little more interaction with Andy, and I think he might be the one who speaks Turkish. Only because I know he's gone to those like Fenerbahce, Galatasaray derbies and covered them in person. So yeah, to your point, it always helps to have the person who's kind of been there on the ground, experienced it, be the one talking about it.
Yeah, he was at I think 4 or 5 different French football grounds the last 3 weeks. He was away for 3 weeks, just getting on the ground and checking out and keeping in touch with people. He's got very good contacts and stuff as well. So it's a real deal. We're not just going to be grabbing whatever's on the BBC website and talking about that. We're going to be, clearly we have to cover the big stories, but even if they are the big obvious ones, we'll hopefully be able to give a fresh angle on it.
But we still haven't gotten to the bottom of the most important question, which is how many languages does Luke Moore speak? Because I'm going to guess it was like, I'm going to say you said everybody spoke 8, so I'm going to guess you speak 10 and you were just being modest.
No, I speak about half, which is about half of English, I would say. I'll probably butcher the English language fairly readily. But other than that, I've got nothing in my locker.
Well, as Daryl reminds me on a fairly, like almost a daily basis, I think it's your people who invented the language, so you can do with it what you will.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I always say to obviously, as you know, Taylor, I'm married to an American, and I always say to my American family, look, we gave you a language, you can at least do your best to respect it. Don't be giving me sidewalk this and jump rope that, and soccer this and trucky that. I don't want to hear it.
Well, I think you guys gave us soccer, to be fair. But yeah, okay. I'm curious how often, what conversations are you having with your in-laws that like soccer, jump rope, and sidewalk are all things that need to be clarified?
I think that one conversation I'm definitely not having with my American cousins and family is anything to do with politics.
Yeah.
And we'll leave that there. I'm only joking, by the way. For those who can't pick up my sense of humour, I am being sarcastic. I genuinely have a lot of love for the American people, hence me doing this show.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the first time we spoke, we did a 20-minute interview, and then I think we did a 20-minute conversation about The Wire. So yeah, I understand your love of American culture. It works. But
always happy to indulge in that sort of stuff.
Of course. And I think I still owe you crab chips. I think I promised you that on the show, and then I'm not sure I ever delivered. So next time we see each other, I'll have to deliver.
You owe me loads of stuff, Taylor. I'll tell you what you owe me. You owe me a load of stuff for the time I put you and your wife up in my flat.
That did happen.
At short notice in London. And for all these shows I do for you.
Well,
you're drifting out of my life like a soldier returning from war. In the morning, you're off again.
Well, anytime you need an American to come on and talk about what's going on in Ligue 1, I'm more than happy to butcher French and struggle to pronounce certain names and places.
That sounds good, actually. I'm not sure we could afford you, though, could we?
Yeah. Again, my payment for you for doing the show is $1 million internet dollars. So as long as your pay is the same, we're good.
Nice. When I hear people say they're internet millionaires, I didn't realise that's what it meant.
I never thought about it like that. All right, I got to find a new phrase then. But in the meantime, I do want to ask you about Barcelona, because I know you all talked about this a little bit in this week's podcast, but I kind of wanted to get your thoughts, like, generally speaking, on what the situation is with Barcelona, because for so long they've been that tiki-taka, Champions League challenging, that like MSN squad, and now it seems almost like things are kind of falling apart there.
Yeah, I think, I wouldn't be able to do this justice in just a quick chat about it with you, because the situation is very, very deep and very, very febrile. But I think they're hurting. I mean, they're hurting on and off the pitch. the Neymar deal, him wanting to move from Barcelona to PSG, and all the accompanying barbs that came with it about their sort of business and how they're going about things, it's hurt them quite badly. And I think, it added to what's going on the pitch with Real Madrid, who look to my eye like by far the best team in Europe and an absolute shoe-in favourites to win the Champions League for the third time in a row. It doesn't really get any worse than this for Barcelona. I mean, you have to understand the context of this as well. I mean, fairly recently, we've seen more than one or two players be quite badly advised by the club and by other people around the club about their financial affairs. And we've seen, I don't want to go into too much detail on this because legally it's very sensitive, but we've seen players have issues around paying tax with the authorities in Spain. Now, do I think Barcelona could have done a better job at advising their players? Yes, I do. And if that wasn't enough, they've got the spectre of two of the biggest contributors to what is often sort of quite pompously called the Barcelona DNA, Andres Iniesta and Lionel Messi, looking like they may not stay at the club, which would have been unthinkable, a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. Lionel Messi's got a contract on the table worth about £500,000 a week, so I guess about $600,000 a week, which he hasn't signed, which he's refusing to sign because I think he wants to send the message to the board that he wants them to sign good players. Andres Iniesta has said that he doesn't know if he'll continue beyond this year. Of course, Andres Iniesta is 33 years old now, but symbolically, it's still very important. Lionel Messi is free to talk to other clubs in January of next year. So, I mean, you're looking at a player who's got probably, as Andy, my colleague yesterday, was saying, 3 or 4 years left at the top level. It's unthinkable for Barcelona to lose him, but Manchester City is sniffing around and make no bones about it. Manchester City can afford him. So to say things aren't very rosy in the garden at Barcelona at the moment would be a colossal understatement.
Now, maybe you all talked about this as well. I can't remember, or maybe this is like a fake news situation. But from what I understand, Barcelona publicly declared that Leo Messi had signed a new deal, I think last year, and then it's come out that that's not the case. Like, is that sort of a sign to you that maybe things are a little bit stranger at Barcelona than we might have thought? Just that, like, the club are saying, like, yeah, he's totally locked down for a good long while, except he's not, and we probably shouldn't have lied about that, and now we're in trouble.
Yeah, I think that's a fairly reasonable assessment of the situation. They were. I think it's fair to say they were confident he was going to sign it. Bartomeu, who's the current president of Barcelona, after Sandro Rosell resigned, did say, I can't remember the exact quote, as ever, I think it would have been translated. He did certainly at least heavily imply that Lionel Messi had signed the contract because he was very, very confident he would do so. However, it's not happened. He's not signed it. May have an axe to grind around the club. Ex-presidents on the bits and pieces have said that Messi won't sign it as long as Bartomeu stays at the club. So if that's true, I don't know if it is true, but it's certainly been talked about. If that's true, they've got even bigger problems because it's looking like a him or me type scenario. One final thing I should add actually on this is on the very day that Barcelona announced they were suing Neymar for £7.8 million for a loyalty bonus they feel he wasn't owed, Lionel Messi and Neymar and one or two other big Barcelona players, obviously Neymar's now at PSG, but an ex-player, were photographed on social media. And it was published at around the same time, which is being seen as a huge statement from the players. And some newspapers over here are now reporting that the dressing room and the board are engaged in what's been called a Cold War.
Man, I feel for Valverde coming in there thinking like, oh, it's Barcelona. It's going to be so much easier. It's going to be like, I'm going to be able to get whoever I want. And now all of a sudden it's chaos, it seems. And it seems to be exacerbated by PSG, who obviously, got Neymar. We all know that. But the one that like, I saw today at least is that like, Barcelona were after Jean-Michel Seri of Nice, I believe it is, and that it sounds like PSG got involved there solely to drive up the price for Barcelona. Like, is this going to be the situation for like the foreseeable future that PSG and Barcelona are just going to like feud and try to like one up each other and drive up player prices and really like make life difficult for the other one?
think it goes on a lot, not just with PSG and Barcelona, but those two clubs at the moment appear to be doing that, behaving in that way. I wouldn't be surprised if it continued. The John Michael Seri thing is interesting because he's a good, highly rated midfielder for Nice, who were very good in the French league last season. They just actually got knocked out of the Champions League playoff against Napoli. But Seri is a player that Barcelona are after. Ideally, I think they'd like him and Coutinho. But the Coutinho thing from Liverpool, is up in the air at the moment. The transfer window is closing soon. But Seri is particularly a fascinating case because I've read reports from certain people that Barcelona weren't actually in for Seri until they saw a lot of activity from fans talking about how good he was, and now all of a sudden they want him. The reality of the situation, I don't know how true that is, by the way. That's just something that was rumoured. Yeah. I would be surprised if that was wholly true. But the situation with PSG and Barcelona is essentially that they're two teams at war. They're two of the biggest clubs now in Europe. PSG don't have the history that Barcelona have, but they certainly got the financial clout. And it hurt Barcelona badly when Neymar went there. Barcelona were also rebuffed, trying to sign Marco Verratti, the midfielder from PSG, who they wanted for a while. PSG weren't happy with the way Barcelona approached them for him, or approached the player. And Barcelona, to be honest, for all the sort of more than a club romantic notion, they do have a track record of behaving quite arrogantly in the transfer market because of the size of club they are. And I think PSG have been annoyed by that. And that might well be at the root of what's been going on. So
things not so great for Barcelona, things decidedly better for PSG. And as you said, things particularly very good for Real Madrid. And at first I was surprised to hear you say that they are not far and away your favorites to win the Champions League. And then I kind of thought about it. I was like, no, that makes total sense. They're the reigning champions and they haven't gotten any weaker. So what do you make of the turnaround there? And it does seem like Zidane has really been allowed to stamp his authority on this team, or maybe that's just kind of the force of personality he has.
Yeah, I think he's surprised to a lot of people how well he's done. But he's got this veneer of superstar around him because of the player he was and because of the reputation he enjoys and because of the type of character he appears to be. He's tough, but he seems to be very good at getting on the player's level. He's a bit of an iron fist and a velvet glove, really. And he's done very well there. The reason the Real Madrid are streaks ahead of everyone else is because, think of the Champions League final last season. Juventus had conceded about 2 or 3 goals in the Champions League in total going into the final. Juventus, of course, 6 times champions of Italy in a row, some of the best, meanest defenders in world football. Real Madrid destroyed them. They essentially destroyed them. The game finished 4-1, I think it was, off the top of my head. But Real Madrid were miles ahead. So, if you're talking about a team who hasn't been noticeably weakened since then, they've got good young players coming through, a good generation of young players coming in, players like Marco Asensio and those types of young, exciting prospects. This is a team who aren't getting weaker; they're getting stronger, and it's hard to think of a team who could really deal with them.
I'm assuming you mean aside from Manchester United. Is that correct?
Well, look, Manchester United is an interesting proposition. I don't know if you want to go on to talk about them. I know you're a fan of their work. But
I am, and I'm keenly aware that I do not want United to draw Real Madrid in any format at any point in this tournament because it would probably not go well. But I do like them. Yeah, we can chat about them.
Well, they're improved. I think they're improved. I think they're very, very readily geared up for a Premier League challenge. They look strong physically. They've got a good spine. But Jose Mourinho, he will say anything, and who knows what he actually means. But he said himself, the only player he feels like he's got at the level of a Real Madrid, and he said this after a friendly, which Real Madrid won. He said, the only player I've got at that level is David De Gea. Oh, no, sorry, he said Paul Pogba, actually. The only player I've got at that level is Paul Pogba, which I then thought, well, you must mean David De Gea as well. But I think he didn't say David De Gea because he doesn't want Real Madrid to sign him. So Mourinho thinks that they're a bit behind. Obviously, they won the Europa League last season, the secondary competition in European football, which enabled them to qualify for the Champions League. And you cannot write off Manchester United. They're a team with an illustrious history, and Old Trafford can be a very, very difficult place to go. But to my mind, they are miles behind Real Madrid. I'll stand corrected if they get a result against them if they play them. But to me, it's not the same conversation. Sadly, because obviously during the 90s and back in the day, they would have been on a level. And in terms of size of club, they probably are on a level. But on the pitch at the moment, they're not.
So at time of recording, I think I'm correct. Maybe the draw has already happened, but at time of recording, I think the Champions League draw hasn't happened. And I think I may have just condemned Manchester United to drawing Real Madrid. I feel like that's something that's going to take place now.
I don't know if they can. I can't remember what the pots are. Real Madrid will certainly be in pot 1. Yeah, I think Man United might be in pot 2, so it could happen. But I haven't got it in front of me, so I'm not sure. It's happening later this afternoon, the draw.
And then I think I'm also correct in saying that PSG and Barcelona can draw each other. I think they can. I might be wrong, but I feel like at some point it's destined that those two are going to meet in the Champions League this season.
It's possible because PSG weren't league winners last season. But I don't have it in front of me, Taylor. You didn't prepare me in time saying we're going to talk about this, so I haven't got it. My 36-year-old adult brain can't keep everything in his mind, so sadly I'm not able to confirm that.
I need you to know all Champions League probabilities and the situation with every single club. I mean, otherwise, like, if you can't tell me about CFR Cluj, I don't know what we're doing here, Luke.
If I knew all that, I wouldn't be. I'd be earning more money. I'll tell you that.
That's a very good point. Oh, actually, but speaking of CFR Cluj, who I don't think are in the Champions League, actually, I did want to ask with the new show on the continent, like, is part of the appeal of that you get to kind of go in depth on leagues that you might not otherwise like have a chance to talk about? Because like for me, like I still love Turkish football, having lived there, and like it's always interesting to hear when people do end up talking about that league, and I'm also interested in like Eastern Europe, and I feel like there's not a lot of reason necessarily to talk about the leagues there. So do you feel like maybe this will give you the opportunities to talk about other leagues, to experience other leagues that you maybe otherwise wouldn't be watching or talking about?
Sure, and I think Andy and James will be able to talk about that very eloquently. And I think my role on the show is to ask the questions. I've got a little bit of knowledge, a bit of basic knowledge, enough to get me by, but the idea is to ask the questions that I would think the listeners would want to ask. So, and the great part about the thing that attracts me in making independent shows like I've always made is that I'm not beholden to anyone. I don't have to follow a particular rule or a particular thread because a bigger media company has a different agenda or something like that. So there's nothing to stop us doing that. I think we'd have to justify it because I think, whether we like it or not, the majority of people probably don't want to hear about lower league Romanian football, for example. So we have to be mindful of that. But that doesn't mean if something of interest happens, we shouldn't talk about it, because I think we should be driven by the stories and by the things of interest that people will listen to on their way to work or whatever, and think, oh, do you know what, that was actually bloody interesting, and I'm pleased I heard that. That's the idea. That
makes sense. And if you'll forgive me a rambling analogy, when my wife and I got married, like, I didn't think we needed a DJ. I was just like, oh, we'll just like play an iPod and we'll put on our favorite like songs and we'll make a nice playlist. And my brother, who knows far more about music than I do, pointed out that, like, number one, you need somebody to kind of like keep the music going and like figure out what you need in any given moment. But number two, his point, which was key, was like, just because you think a song is good and you enjoy a song does not mean that everyone else enjoys that song. And I feel like maybe that's a good reminder when talking about soccer. I have to be reminded of that consistently from Daryl, that like, I'll want to talk about like, ooh, there's this hipster team in like Greece is playing this team in Greece. And he'll be like, yeah, but we're going to get like 8 downloads from that one because people aren't going to be as interested. So yeah, it is that sort of balance of finding the games that are interesting from like a general perspective, but at the same time, like, that still kind of pique the interest and are still kind of interesting to you. It's a difficult rope to walk, and I'm sure you guys will be able to navigate it just fine, though.
I hope so. That's the plan. I mean, it's important to make sure that things are a bit either original or informative or entertaining or funny or whatever. The Ramble, the Football Ramble show that we should do twice a week, which normally looks at English football, or at least British football. We do tend to sort of dig out the nuts and bolts, into the weeds, and work out why things are funny and really try and entertain people. I don't think it's enough just to display knowledge. I mean, learning things and just repeating them, to me, isn't that important. So it has to have some sort of context. And we can't just go on the show, any show we do, and just start talking about stats. Mm-hmm. So-and-so scored this many goals last season. He scored that many goals the season before. How many do you think he scored this season?
Yeah.
That's really boring.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to contextualise things, I think, and that's important. But listen, I'm learning every day. I'm not an expert in it. This is a new show. We're only one episode deep. I'm sure we'll learn many lessons along the way, but so far it's been enjoyable to do. And you talked at the top of this about the energy and stuff. That's because you enjoy doing it.
Mm-hmm.
If you enjoy doing it, it's your own idea, and you're working for yourself, and you want to get amongst it. It comes across, and it sounds a lot more engaging.
So,
you guys well know, by the way, because you do it yourself.
Yeah, I think so. One thing we haven't done as much is the live shows, and I know that's a thing that the Ramble at least seems to be doing more frequently. And to the extent that you all have done a few abroad, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
So, and most of those, as I understand, are in like Scandinavia, I think. Again, I apologize if I'm wrong, but it's interesting to see like how have you all been able to make that jump and kind of go around to other countries and get the audience in and get the listeners to show up. Just
because we're brilliant. No, of course it's not that. It's basically because, we did. I think you're referring to a couple of shows we did. We did one in Ireland, we did one in Norway. The Norway one came about because there's a huge percentage of people in Norway speak very, very good English. The Scandinavian education system is brilliant. They all speak fantastic English. So it's not difficult for them to hear our show and struggle to keep up with it because we are 4 native English speakers. There's a football fanzine over there called Josimar, which is, as far as I understand it, very well read and very well respected. And they came to us through a colleague of ours called Ben, who is let me get this right, a sort of astonishingly talented man. He is a writer, a stand-up comedian, an actor, a rapper, and a producer.
All right, then.
And he works with us, and that's what you got to do, Taylor. You got to just surround yourself with talented people. That's the trick. And he knew a promoter out there and said, look, they want to do this thing. We want to do it. And we talked about it. The money was good and it wasn't going to cost us any money. In fact, it was going to make us a bit of money. It's a free trip to Oslo, which none of us I think had ever been to before. And it was fantastic. We did a live show. And we try and make our live shows. We normally do them around the UK. We put a book out last year and we supported the book with a UK tour. But the show live isn't anything like you hear on the podcast. The show live is a much more interactive, entertainment-based, like theatre show, basically. So it's lots of stuff going on. There's interaction, there's games, there's funny rounds, there's like lots of different bits and pieces, videos and all that other stuff. It's actually quite a big production. So we do that semi-regularly. We're doing another show, just in case anyone's listening and is in the area, on the 15th of September, which is a Friday in London at a place called King's Place, which is the London Podcast Festival.
Oh, nice.
We're headlining that on the Friday night. There's still a few tickets left, I think. So if you want to get involved, do come to that. But we do them periodically. I mean, it's a lot of work, and it takes us out of the news cycle because we do 2 shows a week, and then we normally do a sort of live show on a Friday night or whatever, and it can be a little bit full on. So we don't do them maybe as much as perhaps we'd like, but yeah, we do them, and it's an interesting transition. I thought you had done a live show before.
We've done a couple. It seems like you all are doing them more frequently, at least maybe to my mind, because we've done like 2 or 3, I think. And I think one issue that if you want to go like behind the scenes on this one of the issues that we've encountered is just that, and I don't know if you know this, Luke, so this might be breaking news for you, but the United States geographically is slightly larger than England, and that is I know again.
The Earth is flat.
I was pausing to give you time to process that breaking news, but yeah. So that's part of it for us is sort of like picking out where to do a show, because our listener base is kind of so spread out across the country that like we kind of can't guarantee that like if we do a show in DC that like no one from Portland or LA is going to come out to DC to do a show. So it necessitates sort of like a longer tour to try to hit the spots that would like allow that to be profitable. And that's something we're thinking about and working on, but it's definitely a challenge. And with that said, when are you guys coming to the United States?
Well, look, this is not a Ramble opinion. This is a personal opinion. I would absolutely love to do some shows in the US. I think we would like to do maybe one in New York City, perhaps maybe we would do New York City, Boston, and Chicago or something like that. That would be great, and do it all in one trip, so it's a little bit cheaper. It hasn't happened so far purely because we do 4 shows a week. We do 2 Ramble shows. We do there's New on the Continent show, and I also do a show with Pete called the Luke and Pete Show. And there's lots of other bits and pieces to do behind the scenes on that, as you can probably imagine. Mm-hmm. I do a little bit of media work like I am with you now, and some other bits and pieces. I also have, a semblance of a social life and a wife. So a lot of my week is taken up already. And to be honest, the work to get a little tour going over in the US is very, very heavy in terms of workload. Yeah. It's just not something that we've found the opportune moment to do yet. Would we like to do it? Absolutely. I don't know. Look, I can't speak on behalf of the other guys. I imagine they would be keen, but we just need to find the right deal and the right promoter and all the rest of it, because it's going to cost us. I think when we do a live show, there's 8 of us involved in total, and of course we've all got to get there, we've all got to stay there, we've all got to eat, and we've all got to get home. So the Ramble listeners do tend to take care of the beers for us, which is very kind. But other than that, we have to pay for ourselves. So it's just something that's not logistically worked as yet, but you never know, in the future it may do.
Well, if it ever does, just know that we will be there trying to sandbag the performance. We'll be in the back with Total Soccer Show merchandise on, just kind of heckling and things like that.
Mate, that's absolutely fine. That's exactly as I imagine you anyway. So.
Well, that's good. That seems a fitting place to end it. So, Luke, thanks so much for taking the time. And one more time, if people want to hear more about you, hear more about your podcasts, where can they go? How can they find them?
Right, so you want to go to thefootballramble.com for our UK-based football show on a Tuesday and a Friday. You want to go to thefootballramble.com/on the continent to check out our European focus show with Andy Braston and James Horncastle every Wednesday. Of course, you can just search for these in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And you want to go to Luke and Pete's Summer, or the Luke and Pete Show, for a non-football based podcast about all sorts of different bits and pieces. I really can't sum it up in a sentence because lots of stuff goes on. And that's available at lukeandpeteshow.com, or again, by searching wherever you get your podcasts on iTunes or whatever.
All right. Well, Luke Moore, thank you so much for taking the time, and always good to speak to you. I apologize for being a soldier who wanders away in the morning.
That's okay. Always a pleasure. Never a chore. Just make sure you call me next time.
Sounds good. Thanks, Lukey.